discussion about keeping it real, social branding on the semantic web. Leading our conversation today is Alex Ricky Gonzalez, the voice of SEOWiSE. We have Kristen Drysdale, who will be moderating the conversation and comments. Our very special guests are Mark Traphagen, Senior Director of Online Marketing for Stone Temple Consulting, and David Amerland, speaker, analyst, and author of the book, Google Semantic Search. And now, your host, Alex Ricky Gonzalez.
My first question is I'm going to start with David, and because his post, the post that we're talking about, was titled Keeping It Real. So I want to know, David, what exactly does that truly mean? What exactly does keeping it real mean for businesses?
I'm very glad we're starting this way because it frames it very nicely. We've been saying keeping it real in marketing for a long time now without ever really meaning that. And it was nothing more than a catchphrase. And the demarcation point for this came about the time that semantic search came into it, which is 2012. So we've been in it for about 2 years now, and it's no coincidence. Essentially, what we're seeing is that for anything to have any kind of resonance in a market that's really overcrowded right now, is the need for it to be high quality, which means to be reflective as closely as possible of the values, the mission statement, the principles that guide you as a person or as a brand or as a business. And there's not a lot of difference between all these three. So essentially the keeping it real battle cry, because that's what it is really, is for that perception of marketing as a persona which was flung out there in the past and was designed to hit trigger points in the audience, emotional trigger points, and elicit a response, needs to go. People now respond to real people, or at least to very real values. We live in an audience, in a time when the audience is very demanding of what they actually consume by the way of information, by the products they buy. They're driven by trust and reputation, and a sense that the connection they're forming informs also, in turn, their own sense of identity and purpose in the world. And the only way to do all this, of course, is by being as transparent as possible, by being as honest as possible, which in marketing hasn't always been possible. So this is a challenge we live in right now, and this is the framework within which everything happens.
And you brought up so many of those big words, right? And a lot of those words actually end up showing up in Mark's article too. So Mark, I'm wondering, do you have anything to add to that idea of what it means for a business to keep it real?
Well, my article, people would see our articles side by side, David's and mine, and think these guys must have worked together, coordinate this, right? Because they just fit together so well. And we totally didn't. Other than that, David and I have known each other for 2 years now. We've talked a lot enough to know that we operate in a lot of the same wavelengths, a lot of the same areas from a different perspective. But you might look at my article, which was in the Moz blog, as being one possible practical application of the big concept that was in David's. And my main point was that if this is what we need to be doing, if we need to be keeping it real in marketing, and online marketing in particular, in the years to come, one of the primary ways that brands can do that is by making use of real people. And here I mean going beyond, we've been used to this in terms of celebrity marketing. Brands like to be associated with a celebrity. But this is now people who are actually in the business, producing the content out of an expert level or out of a very empathetic level to the core of that business and representing it as themselves online so that people get to know them. One of my key points was that people relate easier to people than they do to brands. We are developed that way by evolution, that we just want to be with other people, we want to associate with them, we want to be liked by them, we build relationships with them. And so if you have real people representing your brand, that's one way that you can make those connections with people in the online world that lead to the kind of authenticity and trust that David is talking about.
So that transitions beautifully into the next question that I had, because you both mentioned in this idea of keeping it real, you both mention the human component. You both mention the person involved. So, Mark, in your article, you wrote, your brand will most rapidly and successfully gain the social trust of its audience when it is closely associated with powerful personal brands. And I mean, your entire article itself is about the personal brand. So what I wonder, and I'm going to start with Mark this time, where do personas fit into all of this? Why do you encourage putting personal brands in front of a business rather than a persona?
Well, I think by persona here, I'm assuming that you mean kind of a fabricated person or personality. And I've had a lot of pushback from people say, like, why wouldn't we just, invent a person and then we can have multiple people represent or work the content behind that person. And some brands have done that, maybe with a certain degree of success. It's certainly a step in the right direction, perhaps, toward being more personal with your brand, but you can only take it so far. A persona can't really build relationships. As I said to somebody last week, a persona can't show up at a conference to speak. Uh, can't be interviewed on a show like this, for example. This is part of the power. David and I very much understand this, and a lot of you who are interacting with us here understand this incredible power that once people get to see that's a real person behind that content. It's somebody I can actually have a conversation with. It's somebody I can actually ask a question, get answer, and maybe even meet them someday. That's a very powerful connection, and that's what I'm talking about. So it's not just being personal, but having real people engaging. That's the gospel I'm pushing these days.
So, okay. So if are we comfortable with the concept of a persona being something different from a personal brand? Are we just getting into semantics, David? I think
David's always in semantics.
That's true, I am. But let's look at this, because I mean, Mark made a very important point, and he's right. I mean, if we take our articles side by side, he actually creates a very granular picture to the more conceptual one, which I created, and this reflects in many ways the ways we operate. I work at a very strategic level with large brands, and I don't do execution. This is entirely up to them. Mark actually sees both sides of this, and he's very much into the detail of it. So it's quite important to listen to the challenges which he mentions. My knee-jerk reaction would be that, hey, we don't need personas anymore because we had them in the past and they didn't really work out very well. They tried to shoehorn everybody into some sort of brand perceived person, which the company then marketed to. And that created a lot of the disconnect which we experience today. However, Mark made a very important point here that a lot of brands are still marketing at an even greater distance than that. So for them, creating a persona perhaps can be an interim stage which begins to make them comfortable with marketing in a more personal way. And I think that's a win if they approach it in that sense, because let's not forget that companies really want to market in a way that has an appeal to us as consumers, and they really want to connect. And when they don't, it simply reflects the inability of their internal systems to adequately reach out and connect with us. So if a persona, a traditional marketing persona, with all the implications of the artifice and the generalizations that come with it, is the interim phase they need in order to establish the internal routines and the evolutionary process that will bring them closer to us, I think that's a win. So much as I would like to say, hey, we don't need personas anymore, we really need to be people, we need to be personable, we need to get personal values across the web, there is still a need for them, sadly, because a lot of companies are not quite ready to make the huge leap required to get to that personal level.
So, I mean, it sounds like you're both distinguishing that a persona is part of the process of becoming a social brand. Is that, is that a fair thing to take away from that question?
Yes, I would say from an evolutionary point of view, absolutely. And Mark must experience this firsthand because his company deals with clients who perhaps want to get involved in the social web and they haven't got a clue how to do it. So, saying to them, hey, be people and put your people up front, Sometimes it takes a huge leap of faith and they're not ready for it.
You know, what David just said is so important because that's exactly what we've seen. When I'm talking about this personal brand representative, as I've come to call it, for a brand, I realize that I'm speaking into the future in many cases. You know, I'm trying to, and David does a lot of this too. You know, calling our job, we feel like, is calling brands toward what they should be doing, and at the same time realizing that even though we put the big picture up there, like this is where your eventual goal should be, there's going to be steps along the way to that. So I think David just laid that out very well, how that can fit into kind of a halfway house or transitional plan toward overcoming the fear, the objections, all the things that get thrown up about having real people out there representing you.
So okay. So we're cool with personas as a step to personal branding, as a step to being a social brand.